بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على خاتم الأنبياء والسيد المرسلين نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحابته أجمعين. اللهم افتح علينا فتوح العارفين ووفقنا اللهم توفيق الصالحين وانفعنا اللهم بالقرآن وذكر الحكيم. اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا وزدنا علما وعملا متقبلا برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. اللهم زدنا ولا تنقصنا وأكرمنا ولا تهنا وأعطنا ولا تحرمنا وآثرنا ولا تؤثر علينا وارض عنا. أصبحنا وأصبح الملك لله رب العالمين. اللهم إنا نسألك خير هذا اليوم فسحه ونصره ونوره وبركته وهداه، ونعوذ بك من شره وشر ما فيه وشر ما قبله وشر ما بعده، ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم. سبحانك لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم. Asalaamu Alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Alhamdulillah. I'd like to welcome everyone back. And I imagine everybody's a little bit sluggish this morning. The rain makes you feel that way sometimes. It may slow you down. And alhamdulillah, we still make it somehow. Today, the topic we're going to be discussing is the topic of specific expressions or specialized expressions. Last week, we dealt with generalized expressions, al-am, and so today we're going to deal with the opposite of am, which what is called al-khas. Now, before doing that, I wanted to just recap a few things from the last lecture, as well as the some issues from earlier in the semester. That the greatest tool of the usuli, of the scholar of legal theory, scholar of Islamic law, is the mastery of language, or language itself, that one has to master language. The other thing that one is expected to master are the sources. And so mastering the sources can entail one just having a basic knowledge of what is what it itself is considered to be an authoritative source, and what is it that makes those sources authoritative, or rather you say what is the foundation or the basis of my truths. What is it that makes those truths either cogent, or we'll just say authoritative, for lack of a better word. Right now, my mind's working a little bit slow, a little bit still trying to recover from traveling. At any rate, so understanding what is the foundation of my truth, how strong is that truth, how persuasive is that particular source. But then once we have the sources, the question becomes of how do we interpret things within those particular sources. In particular, when we're talking about a source like the Quran or like the Hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, which are sources which convey expressions or teachings, reports of incidents and actions of people. Sometimes those expressions are meant to be taken, or let's say they are taken literally, and sometimes they're taken figuratively, even though sometimes the adoption of a figurative understanding may not be considered orthodox because of a certain norm that exists. And so, as was alluded to earlier in the semester, that when we find people disagreeing about the understanding of certain aspects of not only religion but things in general related to reality, or just people's understanding of what is real and what is true. The reasons that scholars might differ would be because they believe that the Prophet didn't say it to start with. So Hadith, for instance, may be fabricated, or it may be considered to be too weak for a certain criteria or standard that is accepted by certain people, or the expression utilized in the particular report or the statement itself is ambiguous. It can be taken in more than one way. it may have an original meaning, but then also have a secondary or tertiary meaning, or it may be at the end that one scholar believes that one particular statement abrogates an earlier statement or a different statement. So three basic reasons. I don't believe the Prophet said it, or it's too ambiguous, or this has been abrogated by something else. And those are the three basic reasons why they might differ. And so Imam al-Juwayni, and also in line with that, the poem itself, Amriti himself, following the pattern and the teachings which were elucidated in the text utilized by or produced by Imam al-Juwayni, that they begin one of the most important. Thank you. One of the most important discussions is the discussion of language. And they start by saying that the language itself has three basic parts of speech, and then there are different types of expressions in language. The one type of expression which is what I like to call descriptive, and the other is prescriptive. And then after this, he talked about the different types of uses of those expressions. So sometimes those expressions are utilized in an original literal meaning, or they're utilized according to a figurative application. But while acknowledging that there are different conventions that do exist depending on the context, that something which may originally in a language take on one particular understanding, depending on the context, that may not be the meaning that appears to people's minds when they first hear the word, or when they utilize the word. So that's an important part of it. So when we talk about am and khas, after speaking about the awamir and nawahi, the commands and prohibitions, that we're fundamentally, when we put them together and talk about them together, then we're talking about a difference between a literal application and a figurative application. So, for instance, we talk about the commandments. The basic understanding of a commandment, in particular, if we're talking about one of higher authority issuing a statement or making a request of one of a lesser authority, that we believe that the authority of that statement or that commandment or we call that request is what we call a commandment, meaning that the individual is expected to comply to what is to the commandment. So the literal or the original meaning or original meaning implied by commandment is that the action being ordered is compulsory. And so when we say that a commandment can take on a number of other possibilities, then we're saying that is a figurative or majazi application of the particular amr or commandment. So sometimes tahdeed for intimidation or threat can be sometimes, like for instance, if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we make dua, and so Rabbana la tu'akhidna in nasina wa akhta'na. Oh Allah, do not take us to account if we forget and if we make a mistake. Now that sigha of the wording, the way it is worded in the Arabic language, is in the wording of a prohibition, right? But of course, none of us would ever say that God has to comply with our prohibition, to not take us to account for things that we forget and when we err. And so that is, we would say that in this case, this will be an example of a majazi, a figurative, a non-literal application of an amr. And so when we talk about am, the am is taken according to its literal application. Its literal connotation of am, a general statement, is that it is all inclusive, that every single person that falls under every single item or entity that falls under the general statement are included in whatever command or prohibition is connected with it. All right. So for instance, if I say that the am is to always be taken according to its literal application, so when I read in Surah At-Tawbah, فَقَتُلُ الْمُشْرِكِينَ, kill the idolaters, it means kill all of them, right? But of course we know that that's not what is a reference to, because we are very familiar with the Quran, and the Quran is to be read as an integrated whole, as opposed to just simply isolating a statement from the Quran. And so the mushrikeen, the idolaters, is a very general category. So that will be, so if we take that literally, then it would mean, yes, get rid of all of them, right? Take their lives, but that hasn't been historically the case among Muslims and amongst our exegetes. And the average person, of course, wouldn't find that to be very appealing and attractive. They wouldn't attract you to Islam to hear this idea that all the idolaters have to be killed, because then it's like, well, I would be accepting the religion based upon the fear of getting killed, as opposed to me accepting the religion because I'm convinced that is the truth from God, but I don't believe that most Muslims, if not all of us, would believe that that we are Muslim because we are afraid to be killed. At any rate, so that's an example of like a literal type of reading of an a general verse. But then I talked about the figurative or a figurative types of application, and there are two of those. One of them being the example of when a general statement is mentioned, but a specific group of people are meant by that particular statement. And this is what we find most of the time. This is just our figurative. Literal general statement, they have a figurative application, and then exclusionary. So sometimes, Allah says, a particular statement, and it's a general, but it's actually a reference to a specific group of people. الَّذِينَ قَالَ لَهُمُ النَّاسُ إِنَّ النَّاسَ قَدْ جَمَعُوا لَكُمْ. Those to whom the people said, the people have gathered against you. Right, so the first people are a certain group of people, not all the people on the earth, and the second group of people also are a specific group of people. So al-am and murad bihi al-khas, is am is general, but it is actually meant as a specific type of group. قَالَتُ الْيَهُودُ يَدُ اللَّهِ مَغْلُولَةً. Right, that the Jews said the hand of God is held back, it is in shackles, right? And so the Jews, well, not all of them said, there was a certain person who said that, or a certain group of them who said that, right? And so قَالَتُ الْيَهُودُ Uzairu ibn Allah, that Uzair is the son of God, that the Jews said that Uzair is the son of God. No, all the Jews didn't say that. Most Jews didn't say that. There was some of them who did say it, but the expression is a general expression. So we have to understand the way that generalizations work. And remember that when we speak of generalizations, we speak of generalizations on two different levels. One level of definition, and then one on the level of association. Right, on the level of definition, where we're just simply dealing with a single word, where we're trying to invent a category to include a large group of like appearing entities. Right. On that level, it's not so much a problem, but sometimes it can be a problem. And so, in particular, in the area of like race taxonomy, that is a big problem. For instance, because the idea of race, is an invention. So like all of these people of different sort of colors and shades, being considered to be part of one race and excluded from a different race, even though at certain certain areas we find that there's a lot of similarity in appearance between people of opposite races, so-called opposite races than others. So on the level, so for instance, we say there's a such thing as a red man, for instance, red people, so red, brown, yellow, white, and black, right? If we accept that these are true constructs, so on that level, it's not so much of a problem as long as we understand it's just simply a matter of convenience, that we're trying to just simply speak about something in a variety of something that exists, as opposed to thinking about them as a concretized type of true existence. Right, on that level, it's not so much of a problem, but the problem becomes when we start to associate things with their certain colors, right? Right, the associative problem, So we say that, that's an overgeneralization. We should stop overgeneralizing things, So we're not so much we don't so much have an issue with things at the level of definition. It's on the level of association. So when we say Muslims are violent, for instance, right, that's when we have an issue. Or say Muslims are peaceful. We like those, right? All the good generalizations. We don't object to overgeneralizations when they are good. We only object to them when they're bad, right? So for instance, if I say that red people are and this is what's said historically. Red people are choleric, right? They're quick to anger. Like the red people, the Indians, or what we call the Indians, Native American Indians, for instance. They were caricatured in this fashion. They were said that they were angry people, right? And so this is why, and it's made them somewhat savage, right? So the association becomes problematic. Or black people are phlegmatic, another way of saying lazy, right? These things were said, and these sort of cognitive frames have been sort of passed down. Or white people are sanguine, right? They're happy, balanced people, right? These things were taught, So on the level of association, it becomes a very problematic issue, you see. So that's with regard to am. And so just we need to understand that am in this true sense is, or a general statement in true sense, means it includes every single person. But in this metaphorical sense, it is always excluding someone or something from the general category. So the am is the opposite of khas. So am will be in this universal application, a literal application of am, and khas will be an exceptional application of am. And so Amriti says in this regard, he says, وَالْخَاصُ لَفْظٌ لَا يَعُمُّ أَكْثَرَ مِنْ وَاحِدٍ وَعَمَّ مَعْ حَصْرٍ جَرَى. And the specific is a word that does not include more than one, or includes more than one with visible restriction. Right. So when we studied am, a general expression, we learned that am is مَا يَعُمُّ شَيْئَيْنِ فَصَاعِدًا, that an expression that includes two or more things. Right. So it brings together or universalizes, it essentializes, right, a category. Whereas a khas is a type of expression which does not include more than one, right? Or it might include more than one, but it does not universalize its application. Like, so if it may be specifically referring to 5 people, right, as opposed to one, it can be referred to one person, might be 5 people, but not the rest of them, right? That's fundamentally what's meant by that. And it says, وَالْقَصْدُ بِالتَّخْصِيصِ حَيْثُمَا حَصَلْ تَمْيِيزُ بَعْضِ جُمْلَةٍ فِيهَا دَخَلْ. What is meant by making specific is whenever it occurs, the singling out of a part from the whole which it is included. Right, so you have khas, a lafz al-khas, and then you have an operation known as a takhsis, the process of specialization or excluding individual entities from the generality of the group. So there's a type of way, and there are different ways that can happen in the Arabic language. And so then he says, وَمَا بِهِ التَّخْصِيصُ إِمَّا مُتَّصِلٌ كَمَا سَيَأْتِي آنِفًا أَوْ مُنْفَصِلٌ. And that by means of which specification takes place, either is connected, as will come later, or disconnected. That is to say, that in order for us to know that a particular general expression is taken in a specific way, as opposed to be taken in this all-inclusive fashion, that we first must understand that the particular tool that indicates that the general expression is being intended as something specific, that tool is either muttasil, we call it connected with the expression, or is munfasil, it is disconnected. And what it means by connected with the expression is that it is considered to be the exclusion itself, the thing which is excluded from the general expression, is actually from the same species, the same genus of the thing which is mentioned in the first part of the expression. So for instance, I may say that قَامَ الرِّجَالِ إِلَّا Muhammad. Right. The men stood up except for Muhammad. Right. So Muhammad, is he one of the men? Yes, he's one of the men. Right. So he's been excluded from the general category of men. Right. And so we call this istithna muttasil, a type of an associated exclusion. And then we have munfasil, when we have the thing which has been excluded actually is not considered to be part or from the genus of the thing which is mentioned at the start. And so what's popular in this regard is the expression, if I say قَامَ الرِّجَالُ إِلَّا حِمَارًا, that the men stood up, all the men stood up except for a donkey, right? So the donkey is not, right, included in the category of the genus of men. Rather, it has its own category, falls under a different category. And so the mufassirin, the scholars of tafsir, of Islamic exegesis, when they speak about, for instance, the idea of Satan, Iblis in the Quran, because there are certain verses in the Quran which gives the impression that Iblis actually was one of the angels. Right? وَإِذْ قَالَ رَبُّكَ لِلْمَلَائِكَةِ إِنِّي جَاعِلٌ فِي الْأَرْضِ خَلِيفَةً. Right? وَإِذْ قُلْنَا لِلْمَلَائِكَةِ اسْجُدُوا لِآدَمَ فَسَجَدُوا إِلَّا إِبْلِيسَ أَبَى وَاسْتَكْبَرَ وَكَانَ مِنَ الْكَافِرِينَ. And then when we said to the angels, right, prostrate to Adam, all of them did so except for Iblis. Right? So the Quran, was Iblis from the Malaika or not? Right? We say no. But how do we know that he wasn't from the Malaika? Because it gives the impression here that he was among the Malaika. So if we said to the Malaika, to the angels, right, prostrate to Adam, they did so except for Iblis. Right? They did so except for Iblis. Now, Muslim orthodoxy teaches us is that, well, Iblis was not. And how do we know that? One, because in Surah Al-Kahf, Allah repeats the same story, and he said, after saying فَسَجَدُوا إِلَّا إِبْلِيسَ كَانَ مِنَ الْجِنِّ فَفَسَقَ عَنْ أَمْرِ رَبِّهِ, that he was from the jinn, and he, right, departed from the obedience of his Lord, or he rejected or defied the command of his Lord. And so here, you would think that, okay, well, that resolves it. But not every scholar was really satisfied with that explanation. But at any rate, when we deal with him from a point of language, that the scholars of grammar say that when a particular thing being excluded from a general category is being excluded, it must be in the accusative case. The thing excluded, al-mustathna, is in the accusative case, mansub, right? And so what we find in the Quran is فَسَجَدُوا إِلَّا إِبْلِيسَ, right? That is in the mansub case. And that in itself is indicative that he is actually not from the genus of the Malaika. Rather, he was counted amongst them for some other reason, right? He was likened to them, but he still was not included amongst them. Now, so throughout Muslim history, we find the orthodox position has been that Iblis was not an angel. And the nature of the angels, they don't disobey Allah, among other things. They don't have the will to disobey as well. Whereas Iblis showed some will to disobey, and so that in itself would be an indication that he was not from, or he is truly from the jinn. Now, Imam Zamakhshari in his tafsir, which takes a different position on this. Now, he himself actually accepts the idea that Iblis was an angel. But he says the jinn was a category of the angel. They're qabila, a tribe of the angels. They were different tribes. So his idea was that the angels were a different tribe, have different tribes. And so that's the way that he attempted to reconcile it. And so because otherwise, for many people, it may come off as contradictory. But if we deal with it on the basis of grammar, and then the very fact that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Quran says, كَانَ مِنَ الْجِنِّ, right? وَخَلَقَ الْجَانَّ مِنْ مَارِجٍ مِنْ نَارٍ, that he created the jinn from a flame of fire. And so that in itself at least gives us some degree of certainty. But still, we see that there's still a certain small degree of ambiguity there, such that if we find a Muslim saying that the Iblis was an angel, a fallen angel, that it's not kufr. You're not a kafir because you believe that. So that's what's important about it. That what we have accepted is, I believe, is a stronger view, which is that Iblis was not an angel, right? And that is what has been passed down through Islamic history. But we have to be careful as well that when we come across people who may say something different, that we don't think that they have departed from Islam for defying a popular standard view on the issue. At any rate, that's an example of how when the exclusion is made, the exception is made. Sometimes the exception is made from the same category. Sometimes the exception is made from a different categories. And that's how the language works. وما به التخصيص إما متصل كما سيأتي آنفا أو منفصل فالشرط والتقييد بالوصف اتصل كذاك الاستثناء وغيرها انفصل. The conditional and the qualification by means of an adjective, and likewise the exception, are all connected, and other than those are disconnected. That is to say, so if we're going to say that the exception which has been made from the general category is what we call munfasil, it's an exception from the same category, then the way that we can determine that are by three basic operators, linguistic operators. One is by what we call it istithna. So the istithna, the harf istithna, the particle of an exclusionary particle, such as illa, ghayru, siwa, right? Things like that. Ma'ada. That there are a number of them in the Arabic language that when they're utilized as a way to exclude something from a general category, or maybe a shart, a condition. A conditional clause is a way to know that this is not taken literally, that this general statement is not taken literally. So if I say, Akram Bani Tamim in Ja'uk, right? Show hospitality to Banu Tamim if they come to you, right? In Ja'uk is a condition. It's a conditional clause. If they come to you, then show them good treatment. But if they don't, then don't show them good treatment. So fundamentally, that's an example too. And then al-wasl al-muqayyad bis-sifa, something which has been qualified by an adjective, like for instance, in certain verses of the Quran with regard to certain sins, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He prescribes that we free a slave. Like in zihar, the issue of it as a practice during the pre-Islamic period, and then some Muslims continued it in Islam, and then Allah outlawed it, and this was to say to one's wife as a way to divorce her, to say, you are like my mother's back. Antika dhahri ummi. You're like my mother's back. And so in the Arabic we call it al-zihar. And as Surah Al-Mujadila is mentioned, is revealed as in condemnation of this practice, as well as Surah Al-Ahzab is mentioned of in Surah Al-Ahzab. And so with regard to the repentance of the individual, so it's a وَالَّذِينَ يُظَاهِرُونَ مِنْكُم مِّن نِّسَائِهِمْ ثُمَّ يَعُودُونَ لِمَا قَالُوا فَتَحْرِيرُ رَقَبَةٍ مِّن قَبْلِ أَن يَتَمَاسَا. That those who do the zihar of your wives, right, and then return back on what they said, meaning they want to reconcile now, and then فَتَحْرِيرُ رَقَبَةٍ مِّن قَبْلِ أَن يَتَمَاسَا. Then you are to free a slave before you touch one another. So here, free a slave. So it doesn't say what kind of slave. Is a believing slave? Is a non-believing slave? Male slave? Female slave? Child? Adult slave? It doesn't say. Just free a slave before you return to one another. Now, with regard to the matter of the of the murder of a Muslim, of a believer, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala speaks about this and says, وَمَا كَانَ لِمُؤْمِنٍ أَن يَقْتُلَ مُؤْمِنًا إِلَّا خَطَأً. It is not for a believer to kill another believer unless it be by error, by mistake. So involuntary manslaughter of another believer. وَمَنْ قَتَلَ مُؤْمِنًا خَطَأً فَتَحْرِيرُ رَقَبَةٍ مُؤْمِنَةٍ وَدِيَّةٌ مُسَلَّمَةٌ إِلَىٰ أَهْلِهِ إِلَّا أَن يَصَدَّقُوا. And whoever kills a believer by mistake is to set free a slave, a believing slave, right? So it's a believing slave. So in Zihar, it talks about freeing a slave. This example in this verse, it says talking about freeing a believing slave, a qualified slave with believer, right? In the second verse about murder. But the first one about divorce, it says free a slave. Now, many of the scholars say that anytime you find an expression which is absolute, is unqualified, like this in this fashion, then you interpret it according to the qualifier, the qualified verse. You give it the same ruling. So even though the subjects are different, the judgment are the same. The judgment of repentance are the same in terms of kafara. So they say since those two are in the same category in terms of the kafara of atonement for a sin, then you would qualify the unqualified with that qualifier. And so here basically, instead of taking it as the slave as being any slave, every slave or whatever, you understand, any particular slave, then in this case, he said no, it's referring to a specific type of slave. So you have the istithna, the actual article of exclusion, or you have a conditional clause, or it may be an actual word which is qualified by a particular description. وحد الاستثناء ما به خرج من الكلام بعض ما فيه اندرج. The definition of the exception is that by means of which parts included in speech are removed. إخراج ما لولاه لدخل في الكلام. Or let's say a better way, the Imam Juwayni, he says about istithna, the concept of exclusion is to remove from remove something. Had it not been for the exclusion, it would have become part of the category. So basically, he just mentioned in the definition, repeating the definition that Imam Juwayni mentions in his text, the original text. So we don't have to spend too much time on that, but just trying to give you a better understanding or a clear definition. وشرطه ألا يرى منفصلا ولم يكن مستغرقا لما خلا. And its condition, the condition of the exclusion or exclusionary clause is not to be seen as disconnected, and it is not absorbed by that which is absent. Right, and so again, this kind of goes back to in order for the exclusion to be taken literally, or taken literally, then one is important for us to understand that the thing which is excluded has to be, the thing excluded has to be a member of the genus of the thing of the general category mentioned prior to the exclusion. But if the thing which is mentioned, which is excluded, is not from that same category, from that same genus, then it's not a literal type of exclusion. So again, قَامَ الرِّجَالُ إِلَّا حِمَارًا. The men stood up except for a donkey. فَسَجَدُوا إِلَّا إِبْلِيسًا. They prostrated except for Iblis. So that's one condition in order for it to be taken literally. وَلَمْ يَكُنْ مُسْتَغْرِقًا لِمَا خَلَى. And also that it not is not absorbed by that which is absent. That is to say that if I say to you, you owe me $10 minus 10. How much do you owe me? 0, right? Okay, that's not a true exclusion, right? There has to remain something. So I say you owe me $10 minus 9. لك علي لي عليك عشرة إلا تسعة. Right, that you owe me 10 minus 9 means you owe me $1, right? Right, so there has to remain something, So if you find an expression that's saying, 10 minus 10, it really has no meaning. So just making this point from a point of grammar. And there maybe have been some grammarians who thought that it was a valid type of expression. Like in the Quran, it talks about Nuh alayhi salam and the period of time he spent, preaching to his people. And he said that Allah, he did it alfa sanatin illa khamsina ama. Alfa sanatin illa khamsina ama. 1,000 years except for 50, right? 1,000 except for 50. So 1,000 minus 50. So 950 years. And so like a famous verse of poetry which is mentioned in this regard is it speaks about a particular man who had 4 wives, and so his idea was to be eloquent in the way that and of course it's all sort of just not a true sort of divorce, but it's just an example of how this particular works, but he wanted to divorce his wives, all of them except for one. And so he said that the 4 of you are divorced except for fulana, right? So he had only 4 wives. We said the 4 of you are divorced except for fulana, right? And all the 4 of you except for fulana is divorce. أربعة كنا إلا فلانة توالق, right? So أربعة كنا إلا فلانة طوالق أربعة كنا طوالق إلا فلانة وأربعة كنا إلا فلانة طوالق. That the four of you are divorced except for fulana. Right. So meaning that the three of you are divorced. And so it becomes an important issue in the area of like oaths. So this is why there is even a discussion about it. When people start to make oaths, and do we take them literally or not? It may not necessarily have as much meaning to us, but it is important to understand something of the language, especially when we read the Quran. And so then he says, وَالنُطْقُ مَعْ إِسْمَاعِ مَنْ بِقُرْبِهِ وَقَصْدُهُ مِنْ قَبْلِ نُطْقِهِ بِهِ. Moreover, audible utterance has to be made, making those nearby hear, and there must be an intention before the utterance of it. That is to say that if I want to exclude something from the generality, a general statement that I make, then it has to be in the same sitting. It can't be that, okay, you can have my car, right? I'll tell you that today, but then tomorrow I'll say, unless you I don't know, you can have my car, and then tomorrow I'll say for $1,000, whatever, an example like that. So that's just when you're using what we call illa, for instance, ghayro, when you're using these exclusionary clause. It's a purely linguistic matter, right? And so a person also has to have the right intention at the time, of the utterance. So basically, for instance, if it's something in the Quran similar to this, then Allah will mention it right after, illa this, right? Do this, inna al-insana lafi khusr, right? وَالْعَصْرِ إِلَّا إِنَّ الْإِنسَانَ لَفِي خُسْرٍ, right? إِلَّا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا, right? Indeed, man is in loss except for, right? So if he just said إِنَّ الْإِنسَانَ لَفِي خُسْرٍ, then it was like, oh my God, there's no way out. أَرَأَيْتَ الَّذِي يُكَذِّبُ بِالدِّينِ فَذَلِكَ الَّذِي يُدْعُو الْيَتِيمَ وَلَا يَحُضُّ عَلَى طَعَامِ الْمِسْكِينِ فَوَيْلٌ لِلْمُصَلِّينَ, right? So even though it's not what comes after it, so woe to those who pray, those who make the salah. Woe to those who make the salah. الَّذِينَ هُمْ فِي صَلَاتِهِمْ سَاهُونَ. No, but it's not just those who make salah. Those who are heedless or distracted from their prayers. الَّذِينَ هُمْ يُرَاءُونَ. Those who show off. وَيَمْنَعُونَ الْمَاعُونَ. And they deny neighborly needs. Right. So here it's qualified later. There's these descriptions given, so we don't take for wailul musallin. So woe to those who pray. We don't take it literally. وَالْأَصْلُ فِيهِ أَنَّ مُسْتَثْنَاهُ مِنْ جِسِهِ وَجَازَ مِنْ سِوَاهُ. And the basis of that utterance is that which is accepted belongs to the same category, and it is permissible that it should be from other than it. And so we talked about this already. Muttasil, munfasal, sometimes it's from the same category, sometimes it's not. وَجَازَ أَنْ يُقَدَّمَ الْمُسْتَثْنَى وَالشَّرْطَ أَيْضًا لِظُهُورِ الْمَعْنَى. And it is possible that the thing accepted be mentioned first, and the conditional as well, for the purpose of meaning. Right. So basically, instead of me saying to you, "Akram bani Tamim in ja'uk," I can say, "In ja'aka banu Tamim fa akrimhum." Right. So basically, just talking about you can reverse the order of the actual condition or the thing which is being excluded. مقام الرجال مقام من الرجال إلا أحد. Right. So إلا واحد منهم إلا واحد, something like that. So the issue of perhaps that's not the best example, but anyway, the point is just simply that that you can place the thing which is being excluded prior to the thing from which it is being excluded. وَيُحْمَلُ مَطْلُقُهُ مَهْمَا وُجِدَ عَلَى الَّذِي بِالْوَصْفِ مِنْهُ قُيِّدَ. Whenever the absolute is found together with an attribute, then it is counted as restricted. Right? So we talked about that. Raqaba and Raqaba mu'mina. That is fundamentally what he's referring to. For مطلق التحرير في الأيمان أو مطلق التحرير في الإيمان مقيد في القتل بالأيمان. So the absolute command to emancipate a slave in fulfillment of an oath is in cases of murder conditional upon belief. So basically, the example given to you, Zihar doesn't mention Iman as a condition or a qualifier for the slave, but in the matter of murder, iman is mentioned. So he's basically saying that we should apply the rule of when something is not qualified, but in one place, but it's qualified in another place, then the place where it's qualified, we should utilize it for the unqualified place. And this is what he says immediately after when he says, فَيُحْمَلُ مُطْلَقُ فِي التَّحْرِيرِ عَلَى الَّذِي قُيِّدَ فِي التَّكْفِيرِ. The absolute in the case of emancipating of a slave counts as restricted when applied to an act of expiation. And of course, I mean, the English could be worked out a little bit better. But basically, the idea is that, again, the unqualified should be applied or should take on the meaning of the qualified. ثُمَّ الْكِتَابَ بِالْكِتَابِ خَصَّصُوا وَسُنَّةً بِسُنَّةٍ تُخَصَّصُوا. Then the book, that is the Quran, with the book is made specific. That is to say that if we find a verse in the Quran which is am, that another verse may be khas, then we apply the general according to the specific, and the sunnah with a sunnah is made specific as well. All right, so a hadith is am, and another hadith is khas, then we interpret it accordingly. وَخَصَّصُوا بِسُنَّةِ الْكِتَابَ وَعَكْسُهُ اسْتَعْمِلْ يَكُنْ صَوَابًا. And some scholars made specific the book by means of the sunnah. That is to say that a hadith can actually override the general indications of a verse of the Quran, and the verse and the reverse, if used, is also correct. And the opposite mean that a general verse, a general statement of the Prophet ﷺ can be qualified by a specific statement taken from the Quran. وَالذِّكْرُ بِالْإِجْمَاعِ مَخْصُوصٌ كَمَا قَدْ خُصَّ بِالْقِيَاسِ كُلٌّ مِّنْهُمَا. The Quran can be made specific by means of consensus. Likewise, by means of analogy, each of them can be made specific. And that is to say that ijma' becomes, or the claim of consensus, according to this belief or this statement, can actually be a basis for qualifying something general about the Quran or the Hadith. And the same thing said about qiyas. And these are points of disagreement. These are not points of consensus. And so this is a very introductory text to the science of usul al-fiqh, and so which means it's not as comprehensive as we would want for it to be, but it's a good introduction, held by scholars historically from the time of Imam al-Juwayni, because it's been studied for a very long time, and so qiyas itself considered to be a basis for qualifying generalities in the Quran or in the Hadith, because qiyas itself is based upon a text. You can't make an analogy on something which is not textual anyway to start with. So realistically, it would seem that the text is actually what specifies the generalities of the Quran or the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. So we'll come to, that's where we'll end that today with regard to the actual text. So if there are any questions, this is your opportunity. Wa sallallahu ala sayyidina Muhammad wa alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. Another way you can think about this too is just because we obviously when we study these sort of texts and these sort of topics, is always to try to make it relative to our realities, and that's why I give the examples. I try to give as many examples as I possibly can about everyday life. And so when I mentioned the category of, like, we saw race taxonomy, that issue of again, so we understand generalities, we understand specificities as well, and so not every general statement is meant to be taken general. If anything, most general statements are meant to be taken specifically. And so instead of objecting to generalizations or the idea of essentializing things or people, in my opinion, it's better for us to just seek to just acknowledge the very fact that there's no way of escaping generalizations. Like if we say human beings, we're making a generalization. So we say cats, we say dogs. These are general categories from the aspect of a definition. What our objections are typically to are the associative relationships, those types of allegations about those general categories of things that we have come to accept. Now, but it's important for us to question even things from the aspect of definition often too. So just if we dealt with the subject of race, and then understand that race is largely a construct, is a social construct. That what is white or black in America is not the same thing as white or black, right, in certain other places. You see, even throughout history, whiteness has evolved. You see, and so once we start to accept the constructs, then of course we'll take ire at with the false associations made with my particular race. And that's not to say that race as a sociological phenomenon is not real. It is real, because you're talking about an expression about something, a collective experience vis-a-vis another group of people, that sense of solidarity that we feel about ourselves because we had a shared experience, vis-a-vis this other people, this other society, that all people's identities are constructed, in contradistinction to another group of people. You see, what makes white is in contradistinction to non-whiteness. What black is in contradistinction to whiteness and other things as well. So that's their constructs. So we have to start there, of course. But it then becomes the associations. Muslim, right? I'm a Muslim. Of course, is that a religious identity only, or is it also a racial identity? Some people, like for instance, non-Muslims, Muslim is a racial identity, more so than it is a religious identity. And so their response to what we call Islamophobia is that fundamentally a response in America in particular, and in certain parts of Europe, is a racial response, you see, because there's an imagery. If many people who have been honest with me have said, when I think Muslim, I'm thinking of something, one of those people from over there, that was a real Muslim, one of those people from over there, has a certain color, skin color, has certain hair texture, there's a certain imagery there. And so the opposition to Islam, right, and on some level, realistically, is racism. We call it's racism, and it's just hidden under a different name. And then a lot of Muslims know this as well, because the audience that we're dealing with, the audience that we're typically trying to appease, I guess you would say, and so when we direct our condemnations, our apologies, publicly, that often we're trying to appease a certain audience. We feel that this particular audience requires or needs to be appeased. And so we exploit the very fact that they themselves have legitimized a certain type of Muslim as a true Muslim. And so we call it something other than what it really is, many times because we don't want to offend the general category of those people, right? Even though it doesn't, why would offend the general category of people by just simply highlighting a fact, right, of that the people who are often attacked are people who look like this. The attackers often look like that. And you're just talking about fact. You're not talking about stereotyping anything. You're talking about real evidence, realistically, as opposed to Muslims are violent. Okay, well, based upon what? Where are the facts? Where are they? It's two different things. Yes, whether just these statistics can be measured at, you see, especially when we compare it to, this question comes up is, does Islam promote violence, right? It's really a crazy question, especially being asked by the people who are asking the questions. Just to think that you have some nerves to ask that question. See, you're not the right person to ask the question. So, yes. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right. The example, what we're saying is not that these are different types of specific expressions. We're saying that there are three different methods, different ways of knowing that a general expression is taken specifically, is taken in a specific fashion, right? So these three devices of language, so we call it the istithna, the exception, particle of exception, except for, la ilaha illallah, there's no God except for God, right? That exclusionary clause, then we have the a conditional clause. If they come to you, then give them this. If they don't come to you, don't give them that. It's a conditional clause. All right. So if I say if they, for instance, if the fuqaha are present, then I don't know. Think of a different way to put this. Let's say if give that again, like the Muslims are peaceful, right? Right, except for the violent ones, right? So, but when I say the Muslims are peaceful, often we're talking about the majority of Muslims are peaceful. Doesn't mean all the Muslims, So if I say, that certain people are racist, right? It means all of them. It means like it may be the majority of them, right? Or racist towards a certain group of people, right? You see, so the generalization becomes more problematic when we take it literally. You see. But like so the first one is exclusionary clause, the conditional clause, and the last one is something which is qualified by an adjective or just a description, as the example I gave to you when we were talking about the kafara for divorce and dhihar and qasr for murder. So free what type of slave? One verse says free a slave, the other says free a believing slave. So here the first verse was qualified by the second, according to many of the scholars. So if a person wants to reconcile with his wife after he does this pre-Islamic, this jahili form of divorce, then he has to free a believing slave, right? As opposed to just any slave. It has to be a believing slave, because the verse of murder talked about freeing a believing slave. And both of them are in the same category of kafara. So that's the way it is taken by many of the scholars. Not by all of them, but by many of them. Does that help? Yeah. Yes, sir.
Let me see if I can get through some of these online here. Okay. So Anwar asks, I am assuming the answer to this is false, but in generalizations, is there ever an implication that a group may be judged by the actions of individuals in that group? And then I have a second question after that.
Right. So is there ever indication that a group can be judged by the actions of single individuals in that case? No, and from a basic standpoint of language, no. From a basic standpoint of language, no, that there's no basis for that. However, from the standpoint of social interaction, from social contract, like for instance, when you look at the Constitution of Medina, the Prophet ﷺ, in that particular agreement, he included clauses in it that were clear that if certain members of the Jewish tribes violated the agreement, then all of them could be punished, right, for the violation of those agreements. So they were expelled, from Medina when some of them did some things in the context of Islamic history. So based upon social contract, and the Jews actually, and they signed on to this, at least their leaders signed on to this. And so the expulsions didn't only apply to those who were guilty of those violations, those infractions. It applied to the entire tribe itself. So yeah, in that sense, yes, it can occur, but from a basic linguistic standpoint, no, it cannot. There's no basis for this idea that an individual can be or can be judged, or a group can be judged by the actions of an individual. And what was the other question?
Oh, okay. He actually had a second part to that first question, and then I'll ask the other one. Anwar also added to that, can we learn something from a generalization that may be meant specifically?
Oh yeah, but I mean, there's quite a bit we can learn from a generalization that may be meant specifically. And first and foremost is that you learn that generalizations often are meant specifically, and which is really most of the times. It's important, I think, for us to understand again that we are outraged usually not by the very fact that we, for instance, we accept a category or a generalization we call like Arabs, right? For instance, it's a category. It in itself is a generalization. Arabs live in Arabia, right? I mean, it's a true statement, right? Arabs live in Arabia, right? But does it mean all Arabs live in Arabia? No, right? Yeah. So it's a generalization. It's a valid generalization. You see, but then, so that's on the level of the association. But even if we get into the level of definition of what an Arab is, then there's even more nuanced sort of discussion we can have. But I think it's important just to understand how much politics is operating or politics, the sort of politics of generalizations. This is fundamentally the issue that we're faced with, is that we have some people, like for instance, I want a basic mistake I believe the Muslims make with regard to like for instance our condemnations in general of like other Muslims' actions, is that we ask non-Muslims, okay, don't judge us as a collective. Don't judge us by what some Muslims do. But then at the same time, we'll come out forward and we'll try to claim that we represent true Islam, and we represent, what the Muslim community, so we say, don't essentialize us, don't judge us as judge all of us by what some of us do. But then we'll come out and we say that we speak for Islam, right? And, but rather, no, you can't speak for Islam. You can never speak for Islam. You can speak for your understanding of Islam. You can represent yourself and your understanding of Islam. And then especially when we start saying that these people are not Muslims, they don't represent Islam, right? So that's one way to get out of the, because like from the point of definition, we define what a real Muslim is. Now, non-Muslims are defining Muslims on an anthropological sort of basis. Listen, they're not looking into your theology and they say, well, this is true theology, this is not true theology. They don't even care about that. They say, you're Muslim. These people said they're Muslims, and all. So as an anthropological sort of definition of Muslim, they're not dealing with what we consider to be apostates or heterodox. They're not dealing with that. So what we try to do is they say, well, these people are not even Muslims. They say, well, that's what you say. They say they are. Right? So at the end of the day, all you can say is that, listen, well, yeah, okay, they may be Muslims, but I disagree with their understanding of the Quran. I believe that their understanding of the Quran is flawed, and this is why. For this reason, that reason, that reason. That's all. That's fundamentally all I can do. But if I'm constantly standing up and I'm declaring this person to be a kafir, right? Indirectly, they're not really Muslims. Okay, that's really what we're doing takfir. They're not real Muslims, right? Those people looked into the Quran. They found some basis to justify their violence or justify whatever type of perversion, right? Right? They call it self-sanctioned theory, in cognitive psychology. That people don't become violent because of ideology, right? Rather, environment creates the conditions that make people violent. And then after they become violent, right, it will get the sort of the desire to be so. They basically look for reasons to justify their actions. You see, some may look into the Quran, some may look into some other system, right? But people look for different reasons to justify their actions. If a Muslim man hits his wife, it's not because the Quran said so. The man beat his wife because he was something wrong with him. You see, that he may have found some justification for it by looking into Quran, right? In the same way, if someone feels that all non-Muslims should be killed, and they look into the Quran and find the verse, it's based upon the very conditions under which they live. Like for instance, Islam didn't create ISIS. Islam didn't create ISIS. The West created ISIS. Realistically, it was the bombings, the destructions of countries and things like that, creation of vacuums. This is what created created ISIS. That Islam didn't do that. If Islam created it, we have ISIS all over the world. You see, but the very fact that we don't focus on those type of issues, we don't highlight the very contradictions in the claims and the allegations against Muslims. We don't push back and highlight the hypocrisy in all of this. That we give them a free pass. We let them off the hook. That all we do is just condemn, actions of Muslims. And then not just that, I believe that a lot of people who actually have a tendency to incline towards those type of groups, they when they see many of our leaders who are only involved with condemnations against them and what they do, right, and they're acknowledging legitimate grievances, right, that those particular groups have, then we lose any strength or possibility of truly influencing those people to abandon violence. We do, because they'll just say that you're in cahoots, that you're complicit, right? That you're one of those people. You're with them. You're with the enemy. You see, But so it has to be more than just simply condemn the actions of the Muslims. Rather, highlight the actual contradictions and the actions of the other people who these people feel they're fighting against. And again, it's not to say that we validate or approve of the violence on any side, but it's just that if we truly want people to stop, we want the violence to stop, we want all this savagery to stop, then we have to be very balanced in all of this. Perhaps I went a little bit more over the aim of the question. Hopefully it did answer it as well. But those are, I think, there's some of the things that we definitely can learn from the ideas of generalizations that are meant in a specific fashion.
I have another question on that.
Yes.
Let's try to make this as clear as possible. Yildiz asks, when the species of the excluded thing is different from the species of the whole, the excluded is nasab. Is that correct? And then is the opposite correct? Whenever the excluded has the status nasab, it is not from the same species as the whole.
It's if somewhat unclear. The question is somewhat unclear, but I'll answer based on what it sounds like you're saying. And it sort of sounds like you're attempting to repeat your understanding of what I had mentioned earlier today, which was that sometimes the excluded thing is a member of the general class, which is mentioned prior to the exclusion, and sometimes it's not, right? And so, in the Arabic language, there's some ways, from a linguistic standpoint, one way to determine that, which is, if the thing which is excluded, if it does not fall within the same category of the group which is mentioned prior to the exclusion, then it typically is in the case of mansub, of nasb. And so, in wujuban, that it has to be mansub, is compulsory to be so. But still, at times there's some ambiguity in spite of that. As we mentioned before, the other opinion about the sort of nature of angels, or whether or not they actually are tribes. Even though that's an extreme minority opinion, but it does exist, and so we just need to be aware at times, so that we don't make the mistake of accusing Muslims of certain types of being unfaithful, to the religion. Is there something else? That was it. What about you guys? All right, alhamdulillah. Good. And hopefully we'll see you again next week. And we continue to try to make some sense out of this particular science. Hopefully you guys are really benefiting from it. I'm hoping that there's some benefit coming from it. I do know that certain areas, certain discussions are a bit technical at times, but we're patient through them. I'm quite sure that at least this next time you hear it, it'll be easy for you to absorb it, inshallah. وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وآله وصحبه وسلم وسبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك والعصر إن الإنسان لفي خسر إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر Asalaamu alaikum.